let's talk about sexual agency and the short story Cat Person. Now, first of all, I'm not going to say too much about this short story because I really want to hold space for you to think about it on your own and start working through these ideas. We are going to continue to explore these ideas that keep coming up. This idea that consent is foundationally important, but it's not sufficient for good sexual encounters. Consent always needs to be in place, but we also need other things as well. We need other forms of scaffolding and support to enable sexual agency. This is drawing on these ideas that we've been thinking about the role of sexual communication and talking with one's partner or partners about sexual interests, desires, priorities or boundaries, but even more broadly than that, thinking about all of the various steps, all of the various forms of material and social support that need to be in place to enable people to genuinely have control over their own sexual narratives. So, in the short story today, it details a sexual and romantic encounter that was sub-ideal. So, everything in this encounter, according to most models of consent, everything in this encounter was a consensual encounter. However, it certainly wasn't a great sexual or romantic encounter. It certainly didn't go ideally. Now, one of the things I think is so important about this story is because it identifies such a familiar experience for a lot of people. Many folks have had or will have sexual encounters much like the one that Robert and Margot had. And that's why it's so important to start talking about these kinds of encounters. When we only have the tool of consent, is it there or not? And that if it's there, we have to assume that things went well, then we don't have any, if that's the only tool we have, then that doesn't provide us with any way to actually look at this type of encounter and figure out what didn't go well here. Because consent was in place, but still was not a great encounter. Things went importantly badly. So Yarmul gives us some tools to start thinking about what's going on in the encounter between Robert and Margot. Now, before I keep going, I'm going to make a quick note. Yarmul is drawing on a piece of philosophy by Quil Kukla. At the time when Yarmul was writing, Kukla went by the name Rebecca Kukla, and at that time used she, her pronouns. Since then, even though it was only a couple years ago, since then, Kukla has updated the way that they understand their identity and now uses they, them pronouns and goes by the first name of Quil, so Quil Kukla. Now, I just want to make sure that we are clear about this. Yarmul wrote this piece before that happened. He was not doing anything disrespectful or wrong or bad in this article, but at the time of his writing, he was using the appropriate name and pronouns. However, that name and those pronouns are now out of date. So I will not be using that name or those pronouns. And when we read Kukla's work, that is not the first name or the pronouns that we will be using. So I just want to make sure that we all are on the same page about the appropriate way to be referring to this author. Their name, once again, is Quil Kukla, and Kukla uses they, them pronouns. Cool. All right, so Yarmul is drawing on Kukla's work about sexual negotiation and sexual communication, and he's using this to try to figure out some of what went wrong in Margot and Robert's encounter, and some ways that things could have gone better. Now, Yarmul draws on Kukla's work to identify three really important tools that might have helped out Margot and Robert. Those tools are invitations, gift offers, and safe words. These are all incredibly important tools for sexual communication, and crucially, they are tools for sexual communication that serve to enable sexual agency by providing folks with ways to express preferences and desires that are not putting demands on anyone. They are ways to communicate about what one might wish to have happen, and they are ways to express care for, and attention to one's sexual partner or partners. We're going to dive into these particular tools in more detail in the video specifically on Kukla's work. For now, I want us to especially be thinking about what sorts of tools do we think need to be in place to enable good, flourishing, agential sexual encounters? What needs to be in place to help prevent things like the encounter that Margot and Robert had? Because as Yarmul discusses, neither Robert nor Margot were fully enabled or fully equipped within this sexual encounter. Both of them were lacking the tools to communicate with each other. The point here is not to blame either of them, that is not helpful, but rather to look at what was missing so we can identify it and try to make it so that those things are in place for other people as we go forward with these sorts of sexual encounters. We should start to think about what is missing and what we might be able to do in order to equip people with those tools. We need to start asking ourselves, oh, what might we be able to practice, or what might we be able to put into place to enable good and robustly agential sexual encounters?